Find ourselves in week 2 of our rhythm series. We're in the slowing movement right now. Last week was the kickoff, and this week we are diving into Sabbath. What is Sabbath? What does it mean? And we're going to look at what it is defined as in Scripture. But this morning, I want to take you really quick to Egypt. But not the part you were expecting. In Egypt, I want to talk about culture there and life there. See, the gods never rested. The god Ra hauled the sun across the sky and got up the next morning to do it all over again. He did that forever, according to their beliefs. See, Pharaoh sat on the throne as a god, lowercase g, in the flesh. And a god always wants more bricks. So the slaves never stopped producing bricks. So you can not stop when your God is never satisfied. That's the whole logic behind the belief structure in that country. It was. The God is hungry, so you feed him with your body. And there is no end. And there's no such thing as enough. But see, what we find out is that the true God then reaches down into that machine and pulls out a people. And almost the first thing he teaches them is how to stop, how to breathe, how to rest. But I need you to hear that the way that a former slave would hear it. A day off was not a nice perk. It was not just something that happened once a week. For them, it was a theological earthquake. It moved everything. It said, your new God is nothing like the gods you left behind. He's not hungry. He does not need your production to hold up the sky. He rested, and he is inviting you to rest with him. Their rest became the first sermon those people ever preached about who their God actually was. So I need you to keep all that in front of you. Keep it at the front of your mind, because it is the thing we always miss. Before Sabbath is rest, it is a declaration. Before it ever does a thing for your body, it says something about your God. And it answers the biggest question a human being ever has to answer. Whose are you? So now we're going to go back further than Egypt, all the way to the beginning, because Sabbath does not start with a commandment in Exodus. It starts with God. So Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. It's on screen? Sweet. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Verse 3. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. 6 days. God makes a universe, and over the text says the same word. Good. Then it was good. Then it was good. Good, good. It was good. Then on the seventh day, the God who never gets tired, who holds every galaxy in place without breaking a sweat, stops. He ceases. And he rests. And he does something he had not done with anything else in all creation. He takes that day and he blesses it. And he makes it holy. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Isn't it strange? The first thing in the entire Bible that God calls holy is not a mountain. It's not a temple. It's not a person. It is a day. And holy means set apart for God. So from the very first week of the world, one day in 7 was soaked, bathed in him. Before there was a law or a nation or a tabernacle, there was a rhythm woven into the fabric of things. And it was the rhythm of worship. And God did not rest because he was worn out. He rested to enjoy what he had made. You see, the old scriptures have a word for that kind of rest. Manuka. And I had to actually ask Google how to say that because it's spelled like manua. I didn't want to get those two confused. Manuka, it does not mean the absence of activity, like a machine powered down. Right, Glenn? It means a settled whole, delighted peace, the deep quiet of a world that is exactly as it should be. When God offers you Sabbath, that is what he is holding out. A weekly taste of the world right. When God finally wrote this into the 10 Commandments, he did something worth noticing. He gave the command twice. And he gave 2 different reasons. And both of them are really about the same thing, whose you are. The first time in Exodus, the reason is creation. Keep the Sabbath because God made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. You rest because you carry the image of a God who rests. And his rhythm is meant to become yours. The second time in Deuteronomy, that's where we're going to go in a second, the reason gets deeper. So Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15. It says, observe the Sabbath day and to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, or your servants or your livestock, or the foreigner within your gates, so that your servants may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath, and remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out. In other words, keep this day because you are not a slave anymore. You have a new master, and he is good. He's a good master, and he sets his people free. One reason looks back to the garden, the other looks back to Exodus, and both of them plant the flag in the same ground. You belong to him now. The word slaves is the hinge of the whole thing. So I'm not going to rush past it this morning. You see, slaves cannot stop. Slaves make bricks until they drop because stopping is not theirs to choose. But you are not a slave. You have been bought and you have been set free. You lay the bricks down on purpose and you rest like a free person because that is what you are. Now I need you to hear me because this is where things might get a little uncomfortable. Most of us walked out of Egypt a long time ago and we are still making bricks. The whip is gone, but we picked it back up and we started using it on ourselves. The Pharaoh is not out there anymore. He moved inside of us. He sounds like your own voice telling you that you have not done enough and you are not enough. And that if you stop even for a day, everything will crumble around you. You finally sit down on a Saturday, and within 10 minutes, something starts to itch. You feel almost guilty for resting. And if rest were a debt you will pay back with interest on Monday. That itch is the sound of Egypt still in you. The culture has taught us that we have to be producing all the time. And if we don't, we're failures. That if we don't produce something, then we're not worth anything to anyone. So Sabbath becomes an act of defiance. In a culture built on the exact lie of Egypt, that your worth is your output, so you must never stop. A person who keeps a Sabbath they look at that whole system in the eyes and say no. You reject it. If I was a kid and someone told me that I had an opportunity to be defiant, I would have jumped all over this. I would have taken Sabbath all the time as a kid because I wanted to be defiant in every way, shape, and form. But if I would have had the opportunity to understand it and built a process in my life to understand that rhythm when I was younger, if it would have been exemplified in my parents what it means to pause and give this day to God. Parents, grandparents, hear me. What you do now sets the tone of what your kids see and how they feel they have to produce. So oftentimes, our self-esteem and self-worth is based off of what we produce, right? How we see ourselves. But I'm going to tell you a little secret, parents, grandparents, adults in the room. We can't blame our kids for how they see themselves because they see themselves how we have portrayed them when we speak to them, what we exemplify in front of them, how we live our lives, what we take on ourselves. They are miniature versions of us, and they will do the exact same thing. So before you get too angry, before you get too critical, ask yourself, where have I done this? And where can this be fixed so I can show my younger the better way? Because oftentimes, I know as a dad, especially as a dad of a 14-year-old male who thinks he's like the best looking dude in the world. That's you. I know that sometimes my first response is to get frustrated and to respond because maybe he's not doing what I know he should be doing. But have I shown him how to do what I expect of him? Have I lived the higher expectation in front of him so that he knows the better way? This relates to everything, including Sabbath. Because, Tate, do we work on Sunday? No. Do we cut the grass on Sunday? No. Boy, he wants to. Especially when the lady across the street, her yard gets a little high. He's like, I don't have anything on Sunday. I can go cut the grass. No, you can't. Sorry, bud. Can't cut the grass. But why can't he cut the grass? Because I'm trying to show him that you have to set the bricks down. And maybe you don't need one more dollar like you think you do. Maybe the rest will be more beneficial to you than the $1 would be. Maybe the time with your Creator would be more beneficial to you than the extra few dollars would be. But what are you willing to sacrifice to rest with the Lord for a day? What is more valuable to you? Should be the question. You see, when we say that we will not make one more brick for a God who's never real, the Pharaoh inside of us, that thing that is inside of us that really has no impact on us if we say no. He can't hurt us. Our value won't diminish if we say no. We have to realize that being more productive, being more busy is not self-care. The act of defiance in saying that you will rest isn't even self-care. Self-care. It's resistance. I was so tempted to throw Star Wars lines in here this morning, and I tried really hard not to. But in pursuing that resistance, what culture says is acceptable, and always having to make, we are worshiping the one that made us. We are fulfilling an act of worship when we lay everything down and say, God, I'm giving this day to you. When you refuse to make one more breath, you are saying yes to a different king in your life. There's even a flag that goes with it. God told Israel that the Sabbath would be a sign between him and them forever. The mark that they would belong to him and that he was the one making them holy. I put too many O's on that line in my notes. See, a sign is a flag. It does not do the work of the kingdom. It announces which kingdom you are under. That's why it rode in first to declare who was coming this way. Every time these people stopped, a flag went up over their homes that the watching world could read. It said, "We are the Lord's." When you keep a Sabbath, you raise that same flag over your life and your family so that everyone, including you, remembers whose you are. Remember, that's the point. Whose you are. And here is a glimpse of how far this freedom was meant to reach. Sabbath was never supposed to stay a single day on the calendar. What? Yeah. It was a seed. From the seventh day grew the seventh year, when the fields were given rest and debts were released, and people who had fallen into servitude walked free. What? Yeah, that's biblical. And from that grew the year of Jubilee, when land went back to the families who had lost it and slaves went home. Are you starting to see the shape of things here? A people who learn they are allowed to stop slowly become a people who learn they are able to let go. The same trust that lets you close the laptop on the seventh day is the trust that lets you open your hand to someone in need. I need you to hold on to that because we're going to come back to it in October when we talk about generosity. Now, I want to clear up one of the biggest misunderstandings that I ever experienced about this day. Because some of you hear the word Sabbath and picture a gray, joyless afternoon of sitting still and not being allowed to do anything. That's not it. That was never it. Isaiah calls the Sabbath a delight. A delight. It's like when some of y'all get cheesecake, that is a delight. When I get my key lime pie, that is a delight. It is something to be enjoyed, not endured. It is a feast, not a fast. It is the long dinner where nobody is checking the time, with no destination, no place to rush off to. The belly laugh and the nap and the worship that finally has room to breathe. When was the last time you had a belly laugh? When was the last time you had a nap that wasn't accidental for 2.5 seconds behind the wheel? Some of you need room to breathe in your life. Rest and worship are the two halves of it. You stop the work and you turn your face toward God and toward the people he gave to you. and you let yourself enjoy the goodness that is already all around you, and that you are usually moving too fast to taste and appreciate. Delight is not a break from worship. Delight is the worship. And when people forget that, when people forgot that in Scripture, God's own Son came to set the record straight. See, there's a moment where Jesus and his disciples are walking through a grain field on the Sabbath, and the disciples are hungry. So they pick a few heads of grain, and the religious experts pounce. They saw this and they saw it as an opportunity because they had built a fence of rules around this day so high that a hungry man could not grab a snack without breaking a rule. They had taken the freest gift God ever gave and they turned it into a cage. And Jesus will not have it. He was not letting it go. He tells them the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. And then he calls himself the Lord of the Sabbath. He takes the gift back out of the cage. And now, as his apprentices, we take up his rhythm. And his rhythm was never a cage. It was worship. And it was joy. Because like we talked about last week, we follow the steps of the rabbi. So if his rhythm is Sabbath, ours should be too. And all of it, every bit of it, has been pointing somewhere the whole time. It has been pointing to a person. The letter to Hebrews says there still remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And then it points past the day to the one it was always about. Paul told the Colossians that the Sabbath was a shadow, and the body that cast the shadow is Christ. The day was never the destination. Though it was valuable, it was not the end point. It was an arrow. For thousands of years, every Sabbath was God's people rehearsing a rest they did not fully have yet. They were practicing. And then that rest showed up wearing skin. Here's the deepest reason a person can ever stop, and it is a pure gospel. We rest because the work is finished. On the cross, Jesus said 3 words: "It is finished." And then on a Sabbath, his body rested in a tomb. And on the first day, he walked out of it. The most important work in the history of the universe, the rescue of your soul, was finished by him and not by you. Do you feel how that changes the whole day? When you keep a Sabbath, you're not clocking out to recharge for more striving. You're stopping because the striving that actually mattered is over. You are resting inside a finished work. That is why this is worship and not wellness. It is grace and not self-improvement. You do not rest to earn anything. You rest because everything you could never earn has already been handed to you in Jesus. So, here's what I'm asking you to do this week. I want you to hear the underneath. The underneath because of all of this. Because the why is the whole thing. Take a day. If a whole day is out of reach in this season of your life, start with an evening or a long afternoon or real stretch of time that exceeds 15 minutes on a couch just listening to your watch. But do not keep it as a spa day or a self-help moment. Keep it as worship. Stop the work, not mainly to feel better, but to declare whose you are I think we often forget whose we are. Fill the time with what turns your face towards God and toward the people He gave you, and do it as defiance. Firing Pharaoh gets concrete, so let it be concrete. Get the Pharaoh out of your life. It might mean you let the work sit untouched and find out the world does not fall apart without you. This was the hardest part for me. I told you a few weeks ago, went on vacation. Wheels kept turning, kept working, even though there wasn't a computer in front of me. This is the hardest part because I've intertwined myself with so many of the things in my life that I feel like everything sometimes depends on me. Do you know how refreshing it is to step back and just say, God, you know what? I trust you. I'm going to believe that you've got this in your hands. You know what it looks like? I'll give you a for instance, and I wasn't going to do this, but I will now. When you just step back and let God have it, your wife will question if you're okay. But not like because you have an angry face, but because you're randomly laughing at 11 o'clock at night, and she's like, what has happened to you? Because all of a sudden, all of the weight that's on your shoulders isn't there anymore. All of the things that burden you, bigger hands than yours are carrying. And you get to breathe. And for the next 2 days, she'll ask you, are you okay? Why are you being so silly? Turns out I had a concussion, but that had nothing to do with it. What it had to do with was I took a day and some time, and I leaned back, and I trusted my Father to make it work without my hands even being on it. I closed my computer at a normal time instead of at 11:30 at night, trying to solve one problem before I go to bed, and then one more problem before I go to bed, and then one more problem before I go to bed. One night I just closed it. I said, it'll be there tomorrow. God's got this. And that was the night that I was like hanging out with my kids, just chilling, being fun, because I had forgotten to trust Him and enjoy what He put before me. My kids aren't even a job. They're my children. They're my joy. But sometimes we treat them as one more thing we just have to take care of. When they walk in the room, it should not be a burden moment. Oh man, my task has shown up again. Oh man, they're going to be hungry. They're always hungry. You just need to embrace that. When they walk in the room, when your spouse walks in the room, don't be like, oh, great, she's going to make me do something again. Think, man, I'm so blessed that God put you in my life because your perspective matters on Sabbath. Your perspective matters every day because your perspective dictates how you respond to things. And if I respond to my wife like she's the job I have to do, or what she gives me I have to take care of, and if I don't, she's just going to be mad at me, we're not going to have a very good relationship. But if when she talks with me, when she engages with me, when my kids engage with me, if I give them my attention, I might begin to see and find the joy in what they're saying instead of having to tolerate it, endure. If that's how you live your life, you're always going to be tired. You're always going to be worn out because you're enduring one moment into the next moment. I'm going to tell you today, Sabbath brings joy and peace, not just in your body, but in your mind, in your heart, your spirit, in things that sometimes tax you. might be sources of joy because you've spent time in the presence of the Creator. And you've given him all the junk so you can take care of the things that he gave you to steward, to enjoy, to find peace in. Do I always enjoy when my kids come in the room? Yes. No. Because sometimes they demand my attention when I'm in the middle of something. But what do I show them when I set it down and give them my attention? I can only see a Rubik's Cube be solved so many times. And shaving 4 seconds off your personal best doesn't do a lot for me. But when my son comes to me and he is ecstatic because he solved a Rubik's Cube that I can't even do in like a minute, and he tells me 10 times that he did it faster and faster, I need to mirror the excitement on his face. When you sit with your father, you begin to mirror the excitement on his face because you see in him what should be in you. When we sit with the rabbi, when we follow our rabbi, when we begin to look like our rabbi, Sabbath becomes normal. Joy becomes normal. Peace becomes normal. And all the anxious feelings of all the stuff that we have to accomplish seems worthless. But it's only if you're willing to let it go. Slowing down is hard. It takes work. It does. Sometimes it takes other people speaking into your life to say, hey, you need to slow down. This thing's going to crash and burn out and everybody's going to get affected by it. Because that's it. That is what happens. If you live like the world, you end like the world ends. But there's a better way. And it looks like Jesus. Now, I've rambled long enough. Sabbath, don't do it alone. Do it with your people. Even do it with some of your church folks. Sabbath was meant to be shared. You don't have to do it alone. And what I would love to see is a church that stops together. A church that understands that we don't have to serve the Pharaoh inside of us, especially not the one outside of those four walls. Yeah, we have our jobs. We have the things that God's given us to do, our tasks, our creative abilities, our labor. But the labor is not forever. And if yours is, find a new job. You need to rest. A restless, exhausted world looks over and sees a people who are not frantic. That's our desire. And something in them starts to ache for what we have. It's one of the reasons why we started the community groups, so that people can examine and see what it means to slow down for simple moments. So keep a Sabbath this week. And then talk about it. Talk about what God did in it. And breathe. Remember, say it. I said it the last few weeks. I'm going to say it today. There's a seat at the table for you to come and dine and rest. My anchor verse for this year has been, be still and know that I'm God. And this is part of it. Be still. Know that he's God on your Sabbath. And he's taking care of everything that you let loose from your hands. But it's not a line about relaxing. It truly is a line about surrender. And I've tried this year to have that verse rattle in my bones. Because the second part of it is that he will be exalted in all the nations. When I am still, when I stop and I understand that he is God. He is God, not the small thing that we talk about in church that we put in a box and that makes us feel good some days. He is God Almighty. And he will be exalted and lifted up. It might not look like that right now, but a day is coming. And I want to be still enough to see it. So are you willing to be still? Are you willing to give him the time to move in your life, to realize that your hands can only hold so much? His hands hold it all. More than we can even understand or fathom.